Welcome to the REV UP Rebellion, the podcast for revenue leaders rewriting the rules of growth. I'm your host, Abbie White. This week, we are doing a throwback to the best bits of our 2025 interviews, but specifically pulling out the little bits that are going to help you to shape your 2026. So up first, we have Cian McLoughlin, who specializes in win-loss reviews. His team will interview customers as to why did you really pick them? What did you like about the competitors? And so they start to see really common win and loss themes that are absolutely fascinating. Okay, so now I'm fascinated and I'm like dying to know. You've obviously done hundreds and hundreds of these. Yeah. Common themes that we need to look for. What are the sort of like, if you look across the board, the most common themes?
So let's talk about common loss themes first, I think, because, you know, that's kind of always where everyone defaults to why are we losing and what's happening. I think generic, bland, boilerplate content response documents, RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, where you've clearly done a search and replace and then you didn't notice that it wasn't capitalized. So actually someone else's name has crept into the document and things like that. We've had some shocking examples. We had one example where...
I'm cringing so badly.
Oh, no, you're going to listen to this.
This is my worst nightmare. Like one of my biggest fears is like the wrong name, anything like that.
It gets so much worse. And this kind of almost segues perfectly into the next one. But we had one of my consulting team was conducting a review with a prospect that hadn't gone with a vendor, and they were doing it remote, and he was trying to explain the prospect was saying, this is why we didn't pick this company, and he goes, can I share my screen? So my consultant was like, yeah, share screen. He goes, so this is their response document. Somebody turned on track changes and wrote in the margin, we've just made up these case studies. I've just made up and someone else said, that's okay, just put them in anyway. And then they PDF'd it with the comments on and sent that as their final product to the customer. So which segues in to unprofessional, unethical, dumb things still happen all the time. So you get generic, bland, boring, whatever, which is a ticket to the dustbin. Then you get people doing the wrong thing because most of the time, because they're too busy, they're chasing too many opportunities, they're spinning too many plates. And you and I both know things slip through the cracks in that scenario. Now that story is unprofessional, unethical as well. But there's a bunch where it was just people were busy and they messed up. So those two things, I think, lack of compelling win themes, nothing that really differentiates you. We know if we're doing a review and someone says it was an apples for apples comparison, we know that none of those vendors have done their job because they haven't been able to find out things in their discovery that are really critical to this particular customer or to the program of work, and then align them to things that they do really well as an organization and create genuine win themes that are differentiated, that resonate, test those with their internal sponsor and weave those into the narrative of the engagement. So I think they're some of the issues we see. Not being able to build strong internal sponsorship or, stakeholder engagement which has been really interesting in the post-COVID era, particularly for companies that spend more time selling online, because you might have 10 meetings, but if you're not face-to-face with people, it's actually quite hard to get beyond that sort of, that sort of corporate, professional, appropriate conversation to the human behind. So therefore, it's actually quite hard to build that kind of internal sponsor, the person that will have the conversation with you before the meeting starts or the one afterwards where they tell you why that person was sitting back with their arms folded. And in complex deals, you need those stakeholders over an extended period of time. So I think, I could talk for the next hour and a half about why we lose and consistent themes, but that's a couple. If you flip the coin and why we win, I think one of the things we see is like genuine thought leadership. Organizations that are kind of leading the charge in their particular vertical, their particular space, they're giving away a little bit of their IP, a little bit of their secret sauce to the degree that people are going, this is really interesting. This is kind of, cutting edge. And so you're now seeing more than just a vendor. You're seen as a subject matter expert, an authority on a topic. Organizations and individuals proactively come to you. And so I think that's a really interesting one. I'm seeing more CEOs now stepping up and starting to sort of build a personal brand within an organizational brand, which I think is really interesting. And I think it's a good thing because they will get cut through much more so than a corporate brand ever will. So that's one. I think just some basic things. Like if I'm talking to any sales team now, I'm saying, risk has jumped to the top of the food chain by a country mile in terms of the most critical decision criteria. Every single organization we talk to, if it's a meaningful dollar value of an opportunity, it's risk, risk, risk. But the thing that I've learned, which is fascinating, is risk isn't just organizational, it's personal. There's a lot of people who are putting their personal or professional brand on the line or currency on the line if they make a buying decision in your favor. So you've got to find ways to understand, manage, mitigate, share risk with customers that we didn't have to do 3 or 4 years ago. If you're the safest pair of hands in the current environment, you're putting yourself in a really, really strong position to win. And if you can do better discovery, wrap that into win themes and be the safest pair of hands, you're in a really, really good position. Like, price is always there, but I think value is more important than price. So price is just a line item. And one of the really interesting things I've learned over the years is that product and price gets you from the long list to the short list. And then the quality of your people and your purpose gets you from short list to being selected as vendor of choice. Because ultimately, once you're on the short list, you've kind of ticked the boxes. Then they're going, who are we going to be working with? Have they done this before? What are they like to work with? They will back channel to their own network. So referrals have become a lot less important, and peer-to-peer has kind of jumped out. That's the only trusted information source less. People trust feedback from peers and colleagues. So how we navigate that is really, really important to us as well. And if you can do those things, you're putting yourself in a strong position. Ironically, everyone's a bit gun shy about change at the moment. So incumbents are managing to hold on to positions in organizations that they probably shouldn't, because it's seen as a path of least resistance to stick with them. So if you're going head to head against an incumbent, you've got to be looking at what's not just the kind of the potential impact of change, what's the value of change, and what's the impact of doing nothing, and then how can we de-risk that? And we're seeing some vendors be super smart about incumbent swap outs and what they can do to de-risk that, and what they can do to look like a much, much better option, and how they can just help organizations sell internally. And that's the other thing, which is really fascinating to me, is that so much of the selling happens when we're not in the room. So how do we set up our key sponsors to sell on our behalf internally to the board, to the other stakeholders when we're not in the room? And I think that in itself is a hugely important skill set that senior sellers need to nail.
Next, we go to Chris Briest, who is an AI expert and focuses on GPTs. His work is making sellers increase their win rates, reduce the time doing research and some of the boring things, and is making sellers far more effective. And as he says in this episode, if you are still prompting, you are already behind.
AI is a buzzword, whether that's good or bad. Me personally, I don't want AI to be a buzzword. And that's how I think a lot of leaders are seeing it right now. Again, it's on every single LinkedIn post. You can't scroll more than 2 posts on social media without seeing something AI related. So I think a lot of leaders that I talk to are struggling with, how do we take this from being a buzzword into something that's usable, actionable, right? We're actually driving results with it. And I think, the first step that I see a lot of teams take is they're rewriting emails, they're, maybe copying and pasting a couple of prompts, and they're like, ooh, this is, kind of cool. But at the end of the day, you don't see results from that. And I think that's where, again, a lot of executive leaders start to get stuck, is they're like, well, how do we go a little bit further with that? So I think a lot of them know that the writing's on the wall and they're going to have to get in front of it at one point or the other. So I think most leaders are really trying to look for, what is that point of entry to where I can give my team the skills that they need. We know that it's going to be impactful, and we're not just going to be talking AI buzzwords and just, real basic table stakes sort of things.
Yeah. How do you bridge that gap? Because I'd agree, like, from my lens, what I'm seeing, and I'd be curious if you're seeing the same on this, you've got a few people sort of dabbling, maybe like you said, tidying up your emails on ChatGPT, or like very, very basic. You've got a couple people who are really leaning in hard, but I reckon it's like the 1%ers. And then there's the volume of the rest of the like 90+% overwhelmed. We know we should do something, we're not quite sure what. So how do you kind of move from that dabbling, ChatGPT tidying email to like some serious business and use cases?
Yeah, I think number one is process. You have to understand like the clear through line. I'll give a topical example. I talk about like Grand Theft Auto, the video game. And if you're familiar with that, you can run around, you can do a whole bunch of things. It's open world, but you don't really understand necessarily where you're going unless you play the campaign, right? You need to have kind of a clear process to follow so you can unlock everything and really get the most out of it. And that's what I found with like AI and GPTs specifically. So I've spent the last 2.5 years now just hyper focused on that. Pretty much as soon as ChatGPT hit the scene, whether it was how I can accelerate the enablement or how can I put it in the hands of sellers and have them be able to get the most out of it. And the kind of solution to that problem I found was giving them a really clear process. And that's part of, what I work with teams on is, as I've dubbed, GPT powered selling. So understanding how you take your sales methodology and the approach that you should fundamentally use today, but then adapt it for AI and augment the way you work. I think augmentation and automation is a, great topic for us to visit on a little bit later. But if people, again, don't understand that clear through line in that campaign, let's be honest, we're sellers, right? We don't have time to be able to sit there and kind of dawdle, especially if we're not seeing value. So I think once you learn a process, you've got, the right tools, the right prompts, and that barrier is lowered. That's where people are able to really dig in, feel more comfortable, and start to see really instant results. And I hate to burst some bubbles. If you're copying and pasting prompts right now to do anything, you're doing it the wrong way. You're going too slow. But yeah, how do we reduce that non-revenue generating time? And I think there's an interesting discussion there too with some leaders of, how important that time is to really dig into research. And, I try to think about this through two lenses. You've got your, XDRs, turn and burn. We know the volume game right now is tough. So to sit there and tell them to do like strategic research, some, leaders go, that's too much time. We've got a marketing message, we've got a persona card, and we've got to make 6,000 calls by the end of the day. Here you go, ready, set, take off. Over the last couple of years, again, ran a number of pilots with, whether it was North America reps, India reps, London reps, just people across the globe. And what I've consistently seen is that when you have the right tool and the right process, again, all comes back to that process. We constantly saw reductions on an average of 80% in that research time, that time being able to prepare to get on the phone for a call. As much as 92% even when you talk about like strategic selling and analyzing, as we call them here in the States, 10Ks, the annual financial disclosures. Those things are beasts. So, through that research, it's extremely important to do because that's how you're going to connect. But I think one of the things that we kind of got to break down and demystify is that when we use these tools and these processes now, we can sell a heck of a lot better than we could before, and we can do it at scale. That's what leaders love to hear too, is we're not just going to give everybody a cool tool. They're going to, bit bop boo and do some AI wizardry, but we are actually going to see the ability for a smaller team to scale. And not just to be able to do more outreach by pushing the button more and more, but by doing it with better crafted messaging that's going to be a lot more relevant. Because especially today, let's be honest, if you look at an email and it doesn't feel like it was written to you, you're done, right? The personalization factor that we all kind of require in our lives today is very, very high. And we, especially as I think B2B folks, we know when something's just kind of that copy and paste email and we're not interested. So yeah, I think being able to reduce that time, ultimately with better messaging, increase the opportunities that we get. That was another really good stat that we got out of those pilots, is on average a 32% increase in sales accepted opportunities for XDRs. That's significant. You're saving time. You have more opportunities going over to AEs. And just to add real quick on the AEs, especially if they're like an enterprise AE or a strategic account, they've got big deals that they need to worry about. It's not necessarily saving time. It's about having better and more precise messaging. So again, same process, same tool. Even if it's an account you already know, I'll show you a few things that you're going to be able to do to really dig in, try to find those calls to action that's going to make somebody want to get on the phone, go, yeah, this is a problem for us. Let's talk about how we're able to solve that, and really do a good job of connecting those problems and challenges back to our product, back to our value, and really, again, having AI help us be a little bit more of a curator of some of these ideas and messages, and not necessarily the creator where we're just sitting in the dark room, reading the screen, scratching our heads and going, well, what do I say next? How do I say it? What should I say different to these two personas? That takes time. And again, AI is a big accelerator in doing that.
a really quick shout out that we have just announced all the details of our 2026 REV UP program. REV UP is the professional development pathway for B2B sales, go-to-market, and partner ecosystems, where we have fine-tuned every single detail designed to optimize your growth. You'll learn from 10 world-class experts in a 12-month live and interactive cohort-based program. Not only that, we have got AI personalized learning, and we will ensure that your sales and go-to-market teams develop all of the critical skills that they need to win and be successful in 2026. Check out the details via the link in the show notes. After that, we come to me and I reflect on the work that I am doing and the most common skill set around adaptability that we need to have in 2026. What I love about what I do for a living is I actually get to be really, really nosy and go behind the scenes of so many different businesses. Before any of the keynotes that I do or projects that I work on, you get really in-depth briefings as to actually really what's happening, warts and all. The number one conversation for me that I'm having right now is how can we help our teams adapt and embrace change? Because whilst all my topics used to be very much around how do we develop your sales skills and go-to-market skills, and people were thinking much more along the lines of prospecting techniques, what's really become apparent to me is now the number one skill and muscle that we're needing people to really build is their adaptability. So Adam Grant, the US organizational psychologist, he talks in his book, Think Again, about how do you think like a scientist? A scientist has a hypothesis. If we do X, Y will happen. And I'm going to look at the indicators that it's working, and I'm going to look at the indicators that it's not working. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove my personal bias and I'm going to run the experiment. And so it's all well and good us saying, hey, teams, I want you to adapt. I want you to embrace change. I want you to embrace this new whatever it shall be. But in reality, the practicality on the day-to-day, there's actually a massive disconnect between the knowing and the doing. And what I love about the concept of think like a scientist is you can really practically embed it in teams. So to give you an example, my team, every Monday in our team meeting, we talk about what's one experiment that you're running. And everybody is doing it. This is not just for sales. This is all revenue generating teams. So my graphic designer will come back and report back what experiments she's been running, what she's seeing working, what she's not seeing working, and embracing that think like a scientist. So if you can imagine the 1% gains, the compound interest gains from every single person in your team starting to continuously test, try, and evolve, what happens is it starts to create a cultural shift. As an organization, we adapt. It is really part of our DNA and it becomes embedded. And talking about just one experiment a week, no matter how small it is, for me, it keeps the momentum going. And that's to me what makes the difference between we should do this and the practicality of it, because it's bite-sized, it's manageable, it's digestible, and I've got the consistency and the discipline every single week in my meeting to be able to reinforce it. Because the businesses right now that I think are growing, the businesses that are adapting, those are the ones that I think are going to see huge success. From there, we're going to focus on Kamila Hutchison, who talked to us about the $27 million pipeline that they built in 90 days during an ABM pilot. She starts to unpack some of the stepping stones to achieve this and what you need to do to take an account-based marketing approach and get that type of outcome very, very quickly. One of the reasons I sort of begged you to come on the podcast and was so excited when you said yes was you had shared with me when we caught up over lunch some of the CHG Meridian story around how you'd been going on a global marketing transformation program, how you'd started embedding ABM. You talked to me about some of the results you were getting, and I just honestly, like, my jaw was dropped to the floor because the success you've had and just what you have done, it really stood out for me amongst all the businesses I speak to. And I just had a huge amount of respect for your journey, and I just had to get you on to talk about it. So before we sort of deep dive into some of that and hopefully sort of take some of the learnings and lessons from it, can you at a high level give us a bit of an understanding around the transformation journey that you've been on to give everyone context?
Yeah, absolutely. And journey is the key word because we're still on the journey. But so I guess almost 2 years ago now, I was given the opportunity to identify some technology and to build out essentially an ABM go-to-market process. And so we landed on 6 Sense as our vendor of choice, and we we did a pilot and agreed that this was going to be how we were going to roll out. And before rolling out this project, we really understood that it really needed alignment from both sales and marketing. And so in a nutshell, we transformed how we talk about our account planning with regards to moving to like really focusing on target accounts. We aligned both our sales and marketing efforts on the same groups of accounts. And I think it was you that once said that some LinkedIn data was that the crossover between sales and marketing, fishing in completely different ponds, and there was very little crossover between their activities.
It's like less than 30% or something.
Yes. And so that actually stuck in my head where like we really need to align, because even though, we're in 32 markets, we've only got like 300 salespeople globally. And that's not a lot of boots on the ground when you think about it, supported by roughly 30 marketers. And so we need to be very focused and specific on the accounts that we target. So when we really knew this was going to work, we did a pilot actually here in Australia, and we had a small team that we enabled with the platform, and within 3 months we generated 27 million of pipeline and closed a deal with a top tier brand. So it was like that signal immediately said, okay, this is going to work. And what we did once we rolled out globally, several months ago, I pulled some analysis of the cohort of license users that had the platform and tracked their quarterly average opportunity volume that they were creating pre-rollout and then post. We had a 400% increase in opportunity volume across that cohort of sellers. So it's impressive results. And for us, it's all about continuing to embed the behaviors and embed, obviously you roll out a tool, it's nice and shiny at the beginning. And then, people tend to fall into old habits. So for us now, we're moving into like constant sales enablement, as well as, upskilling our marketing team to continue to test and learn and explore the platform so that we can continue to get better and better results.
I think if you look at businesses who are doing well right now, there is that level of experimenting. And I think sometimes, again, that comes to easier said than done. How did you kind of embed that level of the team? So you gave an example of experimenting on different creatives. How did you kind of empower, but also bring that to fruition? Because it's all well and good us going, let's experiment, but no one wants to be seen as failing in inverted commas. How did you bring that to reality?
Yeah, it was a big learning curve for us, and I'm really big on trying to create a culture of test and learn and experiment, and it's okay to fail, and it's easier for us to try something and learn from it than not try and not learn, or like what's worse, spend 8 months trying to get something perfect and then it really not landing either. So I prefer to just test and experiment and just get stuff out there, and then we never know what's going to go viral. We never know what's going to, in the land of social media, some people like really polished, nice stuff. Some people like humor. Some people like something that really pokes the bear. And I think that right now, in this sea of sameness and AI created content, it's important to just be more human and to try to be more emotional and be a little different. And so, experimentation is key, I think, for anyone in marketing.
From there, we go to Matt Jones, who is the co-founder of 4 Pillars Gin. Now, as context here, what they did was they disrupted a very old industry, and as the underdogs in Australia, they came and actually kicked the backsides of the likes of Hendrix. They became global world leader, not just once, but 3 times. So what does it take to be the underdog and build a phenomenal global brand?
Your business is not going to succeed because of a big idea. It is very likely that you do not have a big idea. It was not when people say to me, where did you get the idea to make gin? It's like, dude, it's not an idea. If it was an idea, it was an idea Mr. Gordon had back in the 1700s, and he stole it from the Dutch, who made a product called Hennever with juniper. Like, making gin is not an idea. It is a decision. And I think this is the truth of most businesses. We are just making decisions. And every decision we make, it's like opening a door. And inside that next room are another 10, 20, 30 decisions we've got to make. Great businesses exist and grow and thrive because they get those decisions right consistently, and those decisions line up. The logic of those decisions is strong. So at some stage, this is really at the heart of your question, you outgrow the ability for the founder or the co-founders to be making all those decisions. So you need to start to empower and sort of infuse everyone in your business with that same logic, with that same instinctive understanding. So how we did that at 4 Pillars was just the constant act of storytelling. You know, I think of myself probably in 2 modes. I was a speechwriter for a long time. I love language. My mum was an English teacher. I'm a good storyteller. I know that. I'm a good writer. But I also like to think of myself as a strategic thinker, as a strategist in agency land. And really, strategy is just clarity. Strategy is just the creation of clarity around the decision architecture, around, there are so many decisions in front of us. We could call them tactics. What is the overarching clarifying thought or theory that's going to unify how we're going to make all of those decisions? I've always seen strategy at its best as an act of storytelling. If we ask people to digest a strategy on a page, they won't. If we try and give them a complex strategy framework, they will forget it. If we tell them stories consistently that reflect and sort of embody the thought processes behind that strategy, those stories will stick. So that's my long answer to your simple question. We didn't just tell the stories of 4 Pillars to our consumers and our customers. We kept telling the story of what we were trying to build, where we were trying to go, and how we were going to be successful to ourselves and to the growing team around us.
You talk about distilling down to like a 2-minute version. I thought that was really interesting. And I reflected on, my career in sales and different places I've worked. And actually, if I'd have been asked, the whole cheesy question, could you do the elevator pitch, or better version of that question, could I actually do the storytelling and capture in 2 minutes? I'm going to be honest and reflect on some of those roles and go, I probably couldn't. And even now I reflect and go, oh, that could improve. Yeah. How do you do that magic secret sauce and distill it down to 2 minutes?
I worked for a long time with a strategist and a great friend of mine called Amber Groves, and she introduced me to this notion, which I talk about in the book, of creating a conversational hierarchy for your business and your story and your messaging. And I really like the first word in that in particular, this notion of conversation. I think we live now in a conversational age. We're in a post-advertising era. I grew up in a world where brands were built really through ads. They were built through slogans, taglines, 30-second TV ads, newspaper print ads. And so the succinctness at the heart of brand storytelling tended to belong to the marketing department, to the people crafting the ads. In fact, more often than not, it was outsourced to the advertising agency. It wasn't even really owned internally. So then when you talk to leaders, they didn't really have a conversational fluency with their story. They could get out their strategy on a page. They could recite the business's values and mission and vision and ambition and all of those interchangeable words. But if you said, just stop all of that, just plain English, tell me the story of what your business does and why your business is so extraordinary and what makes it different and why it matters and where you're trying to go. Leaders still to this day are not particularly comfortable in that conversational space. So I think the art that you need to practice as a leader is the art of having conversations about your business and conversations about your strategy. And I think that forces a fluency. And I don't think there has to be a script. I think you can step into 10 different elevators and tell the story 10 different ways. Because if the next 10 elevators I stand in, if someone said to me, Matt, tell me about you, I'm going to tell them a different story every time. But because I'm so fluent in the story of me, it will all sort of land in the same place. It will strike on the same beats. I think that's what we need to be able to do as businesses as well.
And I agree with you on the script piece. I know, working with a lot of sales teams, if you give them a script, it's like if you gave me a script, it doesn't sound like me. You've got to put it into your own words and sound like you. But I also feel like there's got to be some magic also working with, with what you do, working with sales teams to be able to actually articulate that as well. Because even now, too much of the time, I feel we still go to, let's talk about the product. Let's talk about the gin or whatever it is, or my technical widgety product versus actually that art of appreciating the value in the emotional side of it, the emotional connection in the story.
100%. Your job as a leader is to make sense of the world and to tell that story time and again. Be a sense maker. Be a storyteller. Don't retreat behind strategy jargon and leadership logic. Just be the person who brings clarity and brings sense and then tell stories time and again. I think storytelling is the great leadership skill, the great leadership muscle we need to build. But it doesn't matter how good your storytelling is, if back to point one, your product, your service, your business isn't exceptional. So get that done as well.
From there, we go to Ashley Fell, who is a social researcher, futurist, and looks at all of the trends. And she's going to start to talk to us in this episode. We've pulled out specifically for 2026 the different generations that we are going to have in play as our buyers and how we need to sell to each of those generations differently. And so we're going to reflect on that as a great takeaway for 2026. For revenue leaders listening, we're now selling to the different generations. We've now got the digital natives. We've now got, like you gave examples before, right? If it's not quick, easy, I think you were actually pretty generous when you said you'd spend 30 seconds on a website. I think it's probably like 5 seconds and I'm done. Or maybe that's just my patience level. We're kind of selling to a different generation now. So we're having to adapt our go-to-market, our sales, our marketing, because ultimately, the buyer profile is starting to shift.
Yeah.
What are you seeing from, your insights and research on that side of the fence of, from a buyer perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. We've got this really cool infographic which looks at, each generation and what was the marketing style that they've kind of grown up with from, really traditional advertising. And it was just so evident in that example that I shared earlier with my parents-in-law, where they're like watching ads. And I'm just like, I haven't seen an ad on TV in like years and years and years. And so for me, the ads are coming through on social media and it's far more subtle and it's far more through influencers. And it's so different. And that's where it's tough for, marketers, because each generation is behaving in a really different way. So I think the strategy has to diversify, and obviously you've got to spend that time working out, the consumer profiles that you're serving, the segmentation. And I think the generational piece is one really helpful way to do that. Appreciating that we're all digitally connected, but it's enhanced for the younger generation, that we're all global. And these are some of the characteristics I talk about with regards to consumers: digital, globally connected, socially engaged through social media. And again, very much heightened for younger generations. It reminds me of one of the studies we ran. We asked, where are you turning daily to not just doom scroll or like waste time or be entertained, but to teach yourself a new skill? And 48%, so pretty much 1 in 2 Gen Zs are turning to TikTok daily to teach themselves a new skill. And
is it just TikTok dances or beyond TikTok dances?
It's beyond TikTok dances.
Just checking.
No, exactly. I mean, I'm sure that is absolutely part of it. But it's just, and it's the idea, I think, that consumers today are really visual, and we all want and expect things to be communicated in visual ways. We used to have this saying, the number one search engine is no longer Google, it's YouTube, because why would you read something when you can watch it? And so now you've got TikTok that's come in almost like as the new search engine. And I think that is, again, when we think about the context, it's almost rewiring this next generation of consumers' expectations for products and marketing, and again, simplicity, personalization. And it's that idea, I think, that we've all been using, or we've all been, using AI like without us being aware of it. Like when you go to the self-serve checkout, when you get Spotify personalized recommendations, or on Netflix, like that's AI working in the background, taking in your preferences, giving you a really personalized service and product. In exchange, of course, you give something as well. You give information and data to that platform. But I think for younger generations, that's just going to be a key part of their expectation as consumers.
And even what you're talking about, I think gives a really good starting point. Like you said, it is going, right, who are the generations we're serving? Actually, it might be multiple generations.
Yeah.
And so then how are we, doing different marketing to speak to different segments, that personalization? You've talked about the simplicity. You talked about so many different things, but I guess it's also getting intentional around, are you actually doing that generational segmentation and then how they're going to engage? Because it's not really that one size fits all. And I think what's really interesting for me is I feel, and this is just my perception, that B2C is starting to get ahead on this. And I feel like B2B need to catch up. That's just my personal perspective.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at most stuff, I think B2B follows B2C.
Mm-hmm.
So I think actually as B2B go-to-market teams, we need to actually start thinking about this, because you might have some, I think something like 60% of B2B decision makers in APAC are millennial or Gen Z. But actually you've got different generations there still at the table. And then how are we kind of segmenting that just like a B2C company would?
Yeah.
I think there's a big opportunity there that not many people are leaning into.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting observation. And I see that as well with companies, like when I present and I share about the TikTok stuff, they're like, quick, we have to go to TikTok right now and create an account. And then that's kind of a bit like, I think, scary for a lot of people. But even that whole area of social media where, some brands I think who are doing well at the moment are kind of leaning in and experimenting and they're getting traction, but that's not often how in the past B2B has operated. And there's been a lot, as rightly so, a lot more red tape, regulations, but the B2C is a bit more like, let's try this, let's do this, and so those companies I think that are experimenting, that are leveraging even younger generations within their teams to go, how do we reach your generation? And I think that's also the beauty of having an intergenerational workforce, is that you can lean on the people who are, say you've got Gen Zs in your team, ask them about what's trending, where their generation are operating. And like you said, they are like B2C, I think, they would be thinking about and talking about Gen Z, but B2B might be like, oh, they're not out relevant, but they are. They're so relevant. They're going to be like Gen Z and Gen Y, like you just mentioned, in the next few years are going to be the biggest composition of the global workforce. And the Gen Zs, yes, the youngest are 16, the oldest are 30, like the really forward-thinking organizations are already thinking about the alphas. And so just being aware that diversity exists, but also not making assumptions, but actually doing the research or asking questions even of your team and going, how do we reach your generation, or what are they valuing, or how can we tweak the strategy so that it cuts through? Because what's going to translate, to a Gen Z audience is maybe not what's going to translate. And I see this sometimes like with our company as well. Like we're a small to medium-sized organization, and we've got our LinkedIn sort of strategy and presence, which is really different to like a TikTok or Instagram reel one, even though we're a B2B, but that's the need for us to almost not operate like a B2C, but think about how can we create content and information. And I mean, we have so much content through our research, but how do we communicate that in different ways, like multi-purpose? How we'd say it on LinkedIn to an older, typically audience is not going to be the tone, or how we're going to do that through a different platform. So appreciating that, experimenting, having a go, I think is going to be hopefully fun and exciting, but also really important.
I feel like we need to crack out some TikToks in a minute.
if we must.
It's interesting you talk about experimenting. I feel like that is such the opportunity right now. I'm obsessed with Adam Grant, who talks about, think again, think like a scientist, that level of like experimentation. And I definitely think there's so much opportunity to be had there. So I think you've also touched on something that's a really actionable takeaway. Like if there's something from what you're saying that people go, oh, that's interesting, how would that work for us? How do you now run an experiment to try it on for size?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes back to that idea that those who are like innovating are curious and they're willing to kind of do things. And we have this quote from one of our books that I end almost like every single presentation on that I do. It says, the strength of an organization comes from its stories and its traditions, but the future of an organization rests in its relevance and innovation. And it's the idea that if you want to be a player in the future, you do need to be curious and experiment and take risks. And they need to be calculated, of course. But I think those who have the advantage are not the ones who are going, I know everything and I'm confident. And they're actually the ones who are like humble and curious. And again, it's a leadership shift, because in the past we respected leaders who were authoritarian and had all the answers. And I think today it's more about empathetic leaders who are still confident, but that's like a humble confidence, and who are curious. And I think they're the ones who probably bring around them the people that can take their organization well into the future, who again are curious as well and are happy to experiment, happy to try new things. And that idea of failing forward, I think is so important as we think about the future, because it's quite unknown in terms of, which is scary, a scary thought, even as a futurist. There's a lot of change going on. I think it was Justin Trudeau who said that the pace of change has never been this fast and it will never be this slow again, which is kind of daunting.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's reality though. It's where we're at, where we're going. So if you can be curious, experiment, take risks, calculated ones, of course, I think that puts you in good stead to thrive in the future. Yeah.
Finally, we are going to end with our most recent episode, which was our Senior Revenue Leaders War Room. Now, this was absolutely fascinating with Renee Delane, Pat Devlin, and Astrid Groves, and they were all drawing upon what they think as revenue leaders we need to be focusing on to win in 2026.
So we always kick off with the same question, which is, what is either an idea that you want to rebel against, or perhaps it's just a conversation that you feel like right now, this time of year, it needs to be elevated for revenue leaders and just something that really needs to be on the table a little bit more. Pat, I'll kick off with you. Any thoughts from you? Something you want to put on the table?
So much. So there's a couple of things that I want to really rebel hard against. And I'm going to say some things that maybe might offend a few people, but I guess you can edit them out in post if you like. So firstly, it's this, I've worked in a lot of big companies, a lot of small companies. I'm really lucky in that sense, right? Done a bunch of startups, worked for big ugly ones, worked for tiny little ones. And I absolutely hate this idea that I hear from sales managers a lot, which is, we only want A players. I only want to hire A players, right? I don't want the best of the best. None of these C players and B players. So firstly, I absolutely despise this idea that we just label people. Well, what are we like, supermarket produce, you're like A category or B? Or what the hell is that? Like what is an A player anyway? I find it kind of offensive. But then let's say we agree that I only want the best of the best, right? So I only want to hire the best. I only want the best. To a degree, I kind of think, at a sales leadership level, what's that saying is, I don't want to do anything. Like if you're all great, I don't have to do anything. You just go out and you're the best sellers ever. And I kind of sit back and go, give me a better forecast. Great. Yeah. How's your commit? It's awesome. We're all good. It kind of it takes away from the fact that I've got a job to do. And I think the job isn't managing a team of high performers. It's creating a team of high performers. And it's this idea that they're not just out there in the world being A players. I have a job, a responsibility to grow and create that team. And I see it so much. And I tell you what, I reckon it's largely from sales leaders who've never done the job themselves or who lack the confidence to go do it. And so if I'm scared about going on and doing the call and showing you how it works and what to do, then I don't want to have to do that. So I just want you to be awesome at it to begin with. I also think, flip side of this conversation, is I think I apologize if you're in HR and you're awesome, but I don't think I've ever met a team with a strong HR. It's like where careers go to die. And it's where's the responsibility of HR to fix this? It's like, let's find some good HR people who maybe can help firstly look for good leaders, but also look for good potential in salespeople. So that's my rebellion idea.
I'm aligned with you on that, because I actually think sales is not like a single person sport anymore. It is a team sport. And if you're going to show real value to your customers in this day and age, then it's not just a salesperson. It's you, it's your solution consultant or technical person, it's your back end office, like coming to the front and kind of sharing how they're going to support the customer and what that looks like. Like you can't sell alone. So that whole like A player to me is always like the lone wolf, like the person that was out there and everyone hates them, but they like, made the sales targets. So you just like kind of forgave them for it. I think it's unacceptable these days to just kind of have that person in your organization, because your customers don't really want them long-term. It's a very short kind of, you'll get the first sale, but you might not get the second one. But I also think that, at the end of the day, they kill the team culture, always.
I think you just nailed a point that I'd like to align on, which is, when you talk about an A-type personality, what you're really talking about, in my observation, is that those leaders are hiring like personalities. And that in itself breeds a type of culture. And that doesn't necessarily mean the right culture. And when you get success, you've actually got diversity of thought at the table. You bring a whole group of people to really problem solve a customer outcome. And that's what, leadership and hiring and having a high performing team is. So I think the language needs to change. And that high performing team might involve, 3 or 4, 5, 10 different types of personalities. And that becomes an A team. So, at the end of the day, is the ultimate seller and the A player a lone wolf? And does that make success for a team and where corporations are going coming into 2026? And I think we're seeing a lot of change and unsettlement, especially in the technology industry and out at our vendors and our channel. And if you went under the root cause, I actually think you've just both, really articulated part of the problem.
It's time to redefine what a good salesperson actually looks like, right?
If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe and follow so that you get our unfiltered conversations every single week.